Today we'll be discussing the career of singer Billy Joel, and we'll be discussing his diagnosis of normal pressure hydrocephalus. This is Doctor versus Comedian. I'm Dr. Asif, and this is the Doctor of Laughs.
Not a real doctor.
Ali Hassan. Every episode I pick a topic for Ali from comedy and entertainment, and I question him about it. Then Ali picks a topic from medicine and health and grills me on that topic. Today we'll be discussing legendary singer Billy Joel. Now, recently, Billy Joel canceled several tour dates due to normal pressure hydrocephalus. So in our second half, we're going to be discussing that disorder. And Ali, listen, we got a lot of stuff to get through today, including our top 5 Billy Joel songs. So let's get right into it.
Get ready to it. And also, I should say this, both you and I were not huge Billy Joel fans. We're not anti-Billy Joel, but we're not huge Billy Joel fans, which made me feel sad for a bit until I read a lot of stuff about Billy Joel. And you know who else is not always a big Billy Joel fan?
Billy Joel himself?
You got it. He is very hard on himself. Can't stand his own voice in this song. I don't like this song. I went on for too long. I'm like, you and me are on the same page, Billy.
We're going to talk about that. And, you know, he has a very interesting legacy. Let's talk about his accolades. And then we'll talk about some of these kind of personality quirks about him as well.
Oh, yeah.
Nominated for 23 Grammy Awards, has won 6, including Album of the Year for 52nd Street. He's in the Songwriters Hall of Fame, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, the Long Island Music Hall of Fame. He got the 2001 Johnny Mercer Award from the Songwriters Hall of Fame and has received in 2013 the Kennedy Center Honors. You know, millions of records sold. I mean, everyone knows a Billy Joel song. It's impossible to not. My younger daughter is getting into Billy Joel. She's like downloading all of his songs. We can talk a bit about why. Well, I can just tell you now, Vienna, which is one of his songs, is super high on streaming playlists, like on Spotify, Apple Music, for whatever reason. So lots of kids know the song Vienna, which is amazing.
I'd love a reason. I'd love to know a reason.
I have no idea why. Just
okay.
So. But as you said, you know, I think he's always felt a bit, you know, insignificant compared to his contemporaries and friends. You know, Bob Dylan, Springsteen in particular, he gets compared to a lot. In other words, Springsteen being compared favorably to an unfavorable Billy Joel. And he's had this to an unfavorable Billy Joel. And he's had this kind of strange career where he kind of goes back and forth between rock music and kind of a easy listening Barry Manilow kind of style music. You got it.
He sits in that little area. It's a very large area. He sits in that area between the Barry Manilow-esque music and the Bruce Springsteen-esque. And I probably would have rather he was more Bruce Springsteen, because when I want Barry Manilow-esque, I'll just listen to Barry Manilow, exactly. Which isn't that often, but you know, that guy already exists, is the way to say it. And you can never be the boss, right? But you can still rock out. So, yeah.
So I think he's always felt a bit insecure regarding that, you know, so much so that he actually hasn't written new music in 25 years, with the exception of one or two songs here and there. And so he just basically stopped after River of Dreams, and we'll talk about that a bit later. And he just plays concerts and does live performing up until this recent diagnosis of the normal pressure hydrocephalus. So let's get into his background. Again, as we always do when we go through the life of someone, we're not going to do this necessarily in chronological order. We're not going to just hit every single thing. We're just going to highlight some things that we found interesting.
Yeah. And in fact, I do want to talk about his early years for 2 reasons.
Okay.
Parents immigrated from Germany, Jewish origin, people, you know, sort of had to leave Germany. Mm-hmm. They came to the U.S. via Cuba, because there was a quota for German Jews preventing direct immigration. Father was an accomplished amateur classical pianist. That's one interesting thing about his father. Second interesting thing about his father, in my mind, when Billy Joel would have been 7 or 8, his father left. They went through a lot of trouble to get to the U.S., and then his father quoted saying that he found Americans uneducated. Boy, did he not even see the extent of it. uneducated and unappealing, he left the family and he moved back to Europe where he started a new family. Two things about that. Number one, genetics and music clearly play a role. If you think they didn't, incorrect. And also, Billy Joel, who I'm sure we'll get to it, has had 4 different marriages. I think he's divorced 4 times. And I think he's on his 5th marriage, maybe?
Yeah, I'm not sure. 4th or 5th.
4th or 5th.
Sorry
But if you think his father leaving at the age of 8 to go start a new family doesn't have to do anything to do with the fact that he has cycled through marriages, I think you're wrong there too. I think these are connected things.
And by the way, speaking of the family history, he has this half brother, Alexander Joel, who is a classical conductor in Europe. So
amazing.
I'll mention this now because I don't know when we'll get into it. There's a really interesting article from 2001 from New York Times Magazine. It's entitled The Stranger, and it's by Chuck Klosterman. I don't know if people know Chuck Klosterman. He's quite a famous kind of pulp culture writer. You've probably read stuff by him
that's
before.
Right.
And so it's a crazy interview because it's in 2001. He's in between marriages, and Chuck Klosterman.
Not Chuck. You're talking about Billy
Joel. Sorry. Yeah, pronouns, pal. Yes, exactly. So Billy Joel is between marriages. And the whole interview is Billy Joel just basically like, I got to get a date. I got to meet somebody. I'm so lonely. Like just saying all this stuff, basically implying he's depressed. And Chuck Klosterman, I think, is like, what is happening? I'm sure he's just fervently making notes and, using his tape recorder. Like, it's just such an unusual interview. Some people think it's a bit of a divisive interview because it's so personal. And so, like, why aren't you talking about the music? Why are you talking about, your personal life? But Billy Joel keeps bringing it up. Like, how am I going to meet a woman? And that's all there is to life is having a partner and, being together and having kids. So anyway, very interesting. I'll link to that article, but maybe that has something to do, obviously, with his parents getting divorced when he was quite young.
Sure. I think he probably defines himself, an armchair psychiatrist here. I think he probably defines himself through, his relationships and his union. Probably doesn't want to be like his dad. So if he's alone, then how's he so different from his father? Maybe, I don't know. I will say that discussion about him basically sounding depressed is very insightful, very telling, because depression plays a huge role in his past, to the point where he even actually tried to take his own life, drank, was it turpentine or something horrific? And the band he was working with had to get him rushed to the hospital and this kind of stuff.
Furniture polish. Because he said it tasted better than bleach. I mean, obviously, very concerning episode in his life. And we've done an episode recently on suicide, again, with lots of references to suicide hotlines if people are considering something like this. But yeah, and he was put on suicide watch for that incident.
Yeah, so I think depression is something that probably has plagued him and something that he's had to battle through his life. But obviously, Chuck Klosterman got an interview he didn't want, but there's something more in there that tells you a lot about Billy Joel's past.
And just to fast forward to one of his hits in the 80s, You're Only Human. Don't forget your second win, Ali. You remember this song?
I want to say yes.
Oh, boy.
Yes, I'm sure I do. Anyway, sing it for me.
No. But that was a great song. I remember that coming out. Again, that's him trying to prevent teen suicide because he's lived having these feelings. Well, getting back to his early life, he, as we know, learned piano.
Began taking piano lessons reluctantly, by the way, which is hilarious that the guy named the Piano Man was like, I don't want to do this. Well, you're going to do it, buddy.
Yeah. In fact, he says he's a better organist than a pianist, which is interesting.
He had another hobby as a young man, Asif. Do you know what that was?
No, I do not.
Boxing, baby. He took it up so he could defend himself in his, I guess, tough neighborhood. Boxed successfully on the amateur circuit. He won 22 bouts, abandoned the sport after his nose was broken in his 24th match. And if you've seen more than one picture of Billy Joel in your life, you are not surprised by the fact that his nose was broken and that he boxed. Not to shame his looks, but it's very clear. He does have sort of a classic stereotypical pugilist's face. Still made it though, baby. I
tell you.
Still made it as a rock superstar.
And like we said, we're not going to go through all of his chronological albums and songs. That's easy for you to find on the internet. But let's hit a couple of these. And let's talk about Piano Man, which you referenced before. So this was in 1972, he signed a recording contract with Columbia Records and he moved to LA and he lived there for 3 years. So during that time, he wanted to make some extra money. So he worked at this executive room piano bar, and he called himself Bill Martin. He didn't call himself Billy Joel, probably because he's trying to make a name for himself in pop music and didn't want to confuse that. And that's when he wrote the song Piano Man.
Tell me this. What part of Bill Martin is so different from Billy Joel that you would confuse people? It's still a guy with two first names. What do you think he's doing there?
It's a good point. I mean, maybe that's how he just came up with that. I don't know. And some people have criticized Piano Man. The lyrics are simplistic. And he's come back to say, it's in some of the articles that we're linked to. He's like, yeah, there was a guy named Davy who was in the Navy. What do you want me to do, right? Like, this is just with the names of the people.
Hickory dickory dock.
So I think, yeah. So, I mean, I like Piano Man. I think we're going to talk about our top 5 in a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But, I mean, I think it's his signature song, personally. Whether it's my favorite or not, we'll get to that in a little bit. The other song, by the way, that I remember from early on is My Life, which was from 52nd Street. And My Life, I forgot this, became the theme song for Bosom Buddies. Remember the Bosom Buddies with Tom Hanks?
Yeah,
and Peter
of course.
Scolari,
Of course. Yeah. What happened to Peter Scolari? That's a different conversation.
Dude, he passed away.
No, did he? Back then? Way back when?
Recently, like a few years ago.
I didn't know. I didn't know anything else he was doing. I don't know the name even that well.
Yeah, dude, he passed away in 2021. He kind of had a career resurgence. Obviously, he was on Newhart, and then he was in Girls.
Is that right?
Yeah, so
couldn't stand that show.
I know. I didn't watch the show either, but apparently he was very good with that. So anyway, that's really too bad. He died at 66, not that old, so that's quite sad. Anyway, too bad you didn't know about that, but we can move on with Billy Joel.
I know now, and that's what matters. Yeah, let's go back to Billy. Yeah, I did not know about that Bosom Buddies. I didn't know he did anything like that.
So it was covered by somebody else for the Bosom Buddies. It wasn't Billy Joel singing. That's probably why, but that's the same song, right?
Okay.
I really started getting into Billy Joel and knowing who he was in the 80s. And the song that I really remember was Uptown Girl. I mean, that video with Christy Brinkley, Billy Joel's this grease monkey, and then this Uptown Girl arrives at his garage. I can't even remember the plot of the video.
Grease monkey's not a demeaning way to describe mechanics at all, huh? Side note?
Yeah, I guess that's true. And then I guess he wrote the song actually about his then girlfriend, Elle McPherson. But then
who he was with at the time. Yeah.
But then Christy Brinkley was in the video, and then he broke up with Elle McPherson and then began dating Christy Brinkley, which is like...
tough. It's tough to know which supermodel to date sometimes.
I know. Yep. And then so they met each other on the video shoot, and then they got married in 1985. And I think when I think about Billy Joel and his relationships, as we said, he's had many. I always think about him and Christy Brinkley, even though they divorced some time ago. So in terms of other songs, the other one that is a huge one from when I was growing up was We Didn't Start the Fire. Ali, what do you think about We Didn't Start the Fire?
Annoying, for one thing.
Did you think that back then? Like
No, but it was played a lot.
It was played a lot. People don't understand how much this song was played on the radio.
Interesting story behind this. There's a great New York Times article about this song and where it came from. And it starts with Billy Joel having a conversation with Sean Lennon, John Lennon's son, and his buddy. They come by the studio and they're talking about, how hard it was growing up and this and that. And then Billy Joel goes, yeah, when I was growing up, it was even crazier because he's older than Sean Lennon. And Sean Lennon's friend goes, yeah, but you grew up in the 50s. Nothing happened in the 50s. So that idiot is the reason we have that song, because then Billy Joel started thinking about what are all the things that happened in the 50s? Oh, Korean War. Oh, Lenin, the Soviet this, Soviet that, Cold War started, this and that. And all of a sudden he goes, oh, I think I'm writing a song. He started with a list, an angry list that then became a song, that then became an extremely popular song. Years and decades of parodies have come out about, kind of making fun of this song, or sometimes it's making fun. Sometimes it's using one of the most catchy tunes to insert something satirical, which I don't know if that's making fun of the song necessarily, but
no, it's using that conceit. Like there's a Avengers one that Jimmy Fallon did with the cast of the Avengers. It's like pretty funny. So yeah. And he says, Billy Joel says, he wrote the song's lyrics before the melody, which I think is very uncommon for him because he says it shows because it's terrible musically. I'm like, Billy Joel, you're too hard on this song. First of all, this song made me want to flip over a table always, which is what he does at the end of the video. Do you remember this?
It's funny. I do.
And I think it's fun. And of course, when I was growing up in the late 80s, when this came out, like, I think every history teacher was like, oh my gosh, this is a great way to teach history to these kids, so they print out the lyrics and you go through all these different events that occurred. I don't know. I thought it was fun. By the way, you maybe subconsciously mentioned Lenin, like John Lennon.
No, Leningrad. I mean,
Leningrad. I was like, I'm like, yeah, you think that when Billy Joel was writing the song, he's like, oh yeah, I can't forget Sean Lennon's father being assassinated. We'll put that in here too.
That is not the right timeline. No. Suez Canal crisis. That's a big one.
No, for sure. So anyway, I do like the song. And of course, the follow-up is that Fall Out Boy released a cover of this in 2023, but they updated it with news from 1989 to 2023. Right? So they redid the lyrics.
And how was that received?
Very poorly.
Why do you think that is?
I don't mind the song. I think it's fine. I think it actually speaks to how interesting the original is. But the biggest criticism is they don't go through things chronologically. If you read some of the comments on Reddit and social media about what they chose to rhyme and what they didn't, like some of it is very like, off color what they chose to rhyme, and then they miss some opportunities, and they don't mention COVID-19. Everybody gets really upset about that. But I'm like, that's a whole other song, right? That was like...
Maybe. I mean, I think it deserves an honorable, dishonorable, perhaps,
I mean, mention. I guess you just have to mention it, but really not going through things chronologically. And I mean, Billy Joel didn't exactly, but he was kind of parsed into chunks where it kind of made sense. But this is just... all over the place. So anyway, you could listen to it if you guys want.
Well, I think I will recommend that New York Times article, whether you listen to the song again or not. If you can allow that into your system again, I don't know. But the New York Times article is great. This music critic talks about how at age 4, he was absolutely obsessed with this song. And he writes back with a little bit of embarrassment as well. But also it's very well done. It's a very funny article.
Yeah, there's also a hilarious one on Slate magazine where they kind of criticize the Fall Out Boy version. It's really funny. I think I laughed out loud during this article. It's written by the Slate staff, and they just have comments about basically every verse in that.
Well, I'm looking at this right now, and Fall Out Boy also didn't mention Facebook or TikTok or like social media, but they did mention MySpace. Some mistakes were made. Fall Out Boy. Come on, what are you doing? How can you not mention Zuckerberg this is ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, okay, listen to the song, read that article, and you'll get a hint of the criticism for that song. A couple other things to mention. I think at Billy Joel, we have to talk about his performance in concerts. He was one of the first artists in 1987. He made a trip. So this is before the fall of the Berlin Wall, to Russia and played in Russia, and it was video and simulcast. It was the first live rock radio broadcast in Soviet history.
You know what? If you put a gun to my head and said, who did it? I would have thought it was maybe the Scorpions or one of these metal bands at the time. That's a huge deal. I didn't know that was Billy Joel doing that.
And I remember later on he has a song called Leningrad, which is, I think, part of, when he was on tour there. So that's important. And then in 2014, he decided to start an indefinite residency once a month at Madison Square Garden, playing a concert every month, starting in January 27th, 2014. Obviously, that was interrupted by COVID, but he continued doing that until July 2024. And that was, I believe, the 150th lifetime performance at that venue. So pretty amazing. And then he did lots of concerts with Elton John, where they kind of would like do a co-headliner performance. And that's kind of where he's at from a touring point of view. And I thought during all this time that he was continuing to release new albums. I mean, he did a 10-year residency, essentially, at Madison Square Garden. But if you read some of these articles...
Nostalgia sells, clearly.
Exactly.
Hasn't written a song in 25 years. Yeah. That's crazy.
Yeah, his last songs he really wrote. He's co-written a few, one or two since then, but really it was from River of Dreams. And after that, he's like, I'm not writing anymore. And this Vulture article, which we're linked to, is so interesting because it talks about, why he decided to not do this. And he's like, it's really hard to write songs, and he just thinks they're not that good.
Yeah, I mean, on paper, Billy Joel should be doing like the Horseshoe Tavern every couple of months, right? Like a guy who's never written again. But whether we are huge fans of his or not, this is a guy with an incredible discography.
Mm-hmm.
What he did put out, the 12 albums he did put out, had a lot of bangers on them. So why don't we talk about that, Asif? Favorite Billy Joel bangers.
Okay, let's do that. So we're going to do this as usual in reverse order. So Ali will start with his fifth, and I'll start with my fifth, and we'll go back and forth like this. My honorable mention is, We Didn't Start the Fire. Whether you think it's a good or bad song, it is a big part of me growing up and in high school and stuff. So
it is my most annoying song. It's on that top 5 list. But there's one more annoying than that by Billy Joel, and I'm expecting that to fully be on your top 5 list.
Okay, there we go. So why don't we start with your number 5?
My number 5 is Allentown. I don't even know if you know that song, but that is, I was saying he can get Bruce Springsteen-esque. This is what I meant, not just like rock anthems, but also with songs about the working class. And Allentown is a song about, I think, Allentown, Philadelphia, and it coincides with the demise of, American manufacturing. And I just thought it was a beautiful song as far as me visualizing something I didn't know anything about. In the 80s, what the hell did I know about? Pennsylvania, even, for God's sake. But just that demise of, Steel Town, quintessential Steel Town, and how he takes that story. It just reminds me of a lot of Bruce Springsteen. It reminds me of like Bon Jovi too. Like these guys are basically storytellers. What did I know about, Johnny used to work on the docks and all that kind of, what I mean? Like there's something that really appeals to me in these East Coast songs that tell a story about, the river is the same thing from Bruce Springsteen. So Allentown for me fits in that. And I think that would be my number 5.
Yeah, I have a similar song, but it's a bit higher on my list, so I won't get into that now.
Okay.
Number 5 is Tough.
Is it called Tough? Is it a song called Tough?
No, one of the first albums my sister ever bought, I remember the cassette was Glass Houses, which came out in 1980. And she would have been like 9 or 10. But I remember this album, her listening to it all the time. This cover is Billy Joel wearing a cool black jacket about to throw a rock through it's not a glass house, but like the windows of a house, and you can see his reflection in the window. It was just so cool back then. Like I just loved it so much. So I had to pick a song from this album because it's one of my earliest memories of quote unquote rock music. There are 3 hits from this album. Don't Ask Me Why, Still Rock and Roll to Me. I could pick any of those, but I picked You May Be Right, which is the lead track from the album. It's just such a good song, and it brings me back to this time when I was just a little kid. So yeah, that's my number 5.
My number 4 is New York State of Mind.
Mm-hmm.
In my mind, and I'm sure there's ones before it, the original ode to New York City. If you knew nothing about New York, which I did not at that age, there was something about this pride in this city that made you want to get away. Some folks like to get away, take a holiday from the neighborhood, hop a flight to Miami Beach or to Hollywood. But I'm taking a Greyhound on the Hudson River line. I'm in a New York state of mind. It's the embracing of the grit of New York City. Yeah, you go to your sun-soaked vacations, but New York has something. And again, I don't know why that always appealed to me, but grit and grime and hard work and blue collar, there's something I always connected to on that. It's very funny because the lyrics do not coincide with Billy Joel's life at all. He's talking about how those movie stars always go, in their limousines. That's exactly what Billy Joel would be doing. But the song is terrific. I really liked it.
Okay. My number 4 is River of Dreams from the last album that he actually wrote fully.
Interesting.
I was debating it, but then again, when my daughter was getting into Billy Joel and she's kind of finding his songs, I'm like, you gotta listen to the song. It's extremely catchy. It reminds me of The Lion Sleeps Tonight. It kind of has that vibe to it. And I re-listened. I'm like, this song is really good, man. It's a good pop song. So yeah, that's my number 4.
Alrighty. Now, my number 3 is Big Shot.
Mm-hmm.
You had to be a big shot, didn't you?
Mm-hmm.
Super catchy, super fun. Really liked it. That's a Billy Joel style of his own. That is not Barry Manilow. That is not Bruce Springsteen. It felt like that to me. That was quintessential Billy Joel, and I really enjoyed that song.
Yeah, it's interesting. Billy Joel, in one of these articles that I read, he talks about meeting Axl Rose at a club. And Axl Rose had recently covered Big Shot at one of his concerts. And so he was sitting there chatting with him, and all these women are kind of fawning over Axl Rose. Of course, this was, at the heyday of Guns N' Roses in the late 80s, early 90s. And Axl Rose is ignoring all of them. He just wants to talk to Billy Joel about Captain Jack and all these other songs that he loves so much. So interesting.
Sad you shared that, Asif. That makes me like Big Shot a little less.
Oh, boy. Okay.
Could not hate Axl Rose more than I do. Okay, next.
I had to cheat for number 3. I eventually had to put a tie between two things. So
I
know it's really so because these two to me are Billy Joel's signature songs. So the first one is Uptown Girl.
Oh God, that's the one I hate the most.
Oh, I love that song. He was kind of going back to like the doo-wop and like 50s kind of music. It's a signature song for me, for him. But the other signature song, which I'm putting at number 3, is Piano Man. You can't separate him from Piano Man. And I think it does remind me of like Don McLean's American Pie, the way it's kind of structured and all these little stories. It's a much better song than American Pie, though. Sorry.
I agree.
American Pie fans. So anyway, I put those two together.
Very nicely done. I struggled where to put Piano Man here on this list and then didn't put it anywhere somehow. But number 2 for me is You May Be Right, which is, it's in the Big Shot space. This is like real, like good rocking Billy Joel. Yeah, I loved it. Yours was number 4, I think. You may be right. You had number 5. Yeah. Now 5 even. I like that song. I like that song.
For me, okay, I don't think they're tracks that many people will like, but I love this song again. So number 2 is the Downeaster Alexa.
I don't even know what that is.
Downeaster Alexa is from the Stormfront album, which is the one that had We Didn't Start the Fire. You didn't start the fire. You didn't start the fire, Ali. We didn't start the fire. And so it was like a third single of it. So people may not have remembered the song. So it's actually him playing the accordion for most of it. And it's all about these fishermen in Long Island Sound and how they're struggling with their business. So I'm like, what I liked about it was, again, it's kind of what you said about Allentown. Like, you're talking about real people with these real hardships. And it just was giving, again, when you compare it to something like Uptown Girl, like, oh, you're really getting at something here. I want more of this from you, Billy Joel. Didn't really end up doing too much more of that, but it was quite good. So that's my number 2.
Okay. My number 1, which was not critically acclaimed universally, but I really liked, It's Still Rock and Roll to me.
Okay.
I think, again, I could have put You May Be Right or Big Shot in number 1. These are a rotating list. There were some complaints about that song never taking off. A music critic said it has a torrid sax break, someone said. But again, I love Bruce Springsteen, so I grew to love the saxophone. Anyway, yeah, that's my number 1, buddy. What can I tell you?
So my number 1, I'm sure lots of people are going to disagree with me about this because it's a very different song for him. So it came out in 84. And again, this is like the doo-wop kind of time period for him where he's doing this. So it's For the Longest Time, which is essentially an a cappella song, right? I just think it's a really good song. I think it's a lot of fun. So it's hard. I could move any of these up or down. But
to quote my number 2 song and your number 5 song, you may be right. It may be a good song, or it may not be.
But you're unclear about whether it might be or not.
No, I think I do like it too. I didn't find it annoying, and that is a phase he was going through, and it's an ode to these various sounds, and that's okay. I'm okay with that.
It's different if you pick, I'm trying to think of an example, like if you pick like a really serious artist and you pick their most poppy song. Like if you like REM and you picked Stand or Shiny Happy People, you're like, what are you doing? You're picking like the most pop commercial song from this artist who has just made such classic introspective music. Sorry, Billy Joel, but that's not who you are and what you are. So I think there's nothing wrong with picking some of these more popular songs for Billy Joel because that's what he is really, really good at.
Sure.
And I'm just going to give a quick plug before we end this section for something that's not out yet, but it's going to be coming out soon, hopefully the next few months, now that the TV show Severance is over. I've mentioned before that Adam Scott from Severance and other TV shows and movies you've seen does a podcast with Scott Aukerman.
So they've done U2 that you've mentioned. They've done Bruce Springsteen.
Yes, they've done REM.
Oh.
And they've done a few other minor ones here and there, but the next big one they're going to do, so the U2 one is you talking U2 to me. The next one is going to be you talking Billy Joel to my e-hole. And e-hole is your ear hole. So that is supposed to be coming up very soon. So that's going to be a great time to revisit the albums of Billy Joel and all these classic songs. Very curious what these guys are going to say. So stay tuned for that. Hopefully they'll be out in the next few months. I know Adam Scott to finish Severance and all the press associated with that before they start working on it. So yeah, definitely check that out. Yes, encouraging you to listen to another podcast, but it's probably my favorite podcast after this one.
Good for you, man. Now, we're talking about Billy Joel also, and I love that you tied it in with this E-Hole podcast because his music, his life, his legacy, obviously worth celebrating. He is not dead or dying. I checked with Asif first. That was very important to me before we did this topic. But he does have something called normal pressure hydrocephalus. Many people, if not most, will not know what that is. But what we do know is that he's taking a step away from performing live because of it. So I thought, let's talk about this and not figure out. You've got it figured out. Let's hear about what this is and what this means for Billy Joel. And is it something he can recover from? Is this the beginning of something very bad? So yeah, let's talk about what this is. What is normal pressure hydrocephalus and what other types of pressure of hydrocephalus are out there?
These are all really good questions. And of course, personally, I was affected because he was supposed to have a concert this March, which he put off till next March, which is actually good for me because now that my daughter's into it, I'm like, okay, we'll get tickets. We'll go to Toronto and buy it. And then he's canceled 2026 as well. So it's definitely serious because he's canceling several years of concerts. So
when you say you were personally affected, by the way, you really made it sound like somebody in your family also has normal pressure hydrocephalus.
No, I mean, in the most superficial way possible.
In the most selfish way possible.
Exactly.
Got it. Okay.
So your initial question was really good about what is hydrocephalus. So hydrocephalus, it literally means water on the brain. Okay, so we see this commonly in kids for whatever reason. Usually it's a small defect in their brain tissue that causes a blockage, or sometimes if you've had a bleed in your brain or something like meningitis, you could develop hydrocephalus. So what happens is basically in our brain, we have these lakes of fluid, which are called ventricles. And they circulate with these lakes of fluid in our brain, and the fluid circulates and goes down our spinal cord and coats and bathes our spinal cord. Okay? And this fluid is constantly circulating. So there's always a connection of this fluid between your brain and your spinal cord. So in our brain, we have these ventricles, and the ventricles, they're responsible for not just a location that the fluid takes up, but there's areas that produce the spinal fluid, and there's areas that absorb the spinal fluid. So any sort of obstruction will cause these lakes of fluids to get bigger, or what we say dilate, and that can exert pressure on brain structures. And that in some people can cause headaches in little babies because their skulls, they have a soft spot, Ollie. So that means their skull's not fused yet. So they won't really get headaches. They might get some irritability, but their heads will just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Because
is that encephalitis?
No, encephalitis is an inflammation of the brain tissue.
Okay.
So that's a slightly different sort of thing. So they can get these.
So this hydro refers to the water. The hydro refers to the
encephalitis means brain or the head.
Okay.
So in kids we see that, and that's associated with a high pressure. Okay, so if you measure the pressure, and we know what normal spinal fluid pressure should be, if you measure that, it's elevated in these kids, and then they often need a drain or something inserted into their brain And then they often have what's called a ventricular peritoneal shunt. So it goes into their brain and they tunnel a tube down from their brain all the way down to their abdomen. And they release the fluid in there through this tube, and then it gets absorbed through our abdominal cavity and gets recirculated. So they often need this to relieve the pressure. But the issue in these adults with normal pressure hydrocephalus is they get the symptoms of the ventricles getting bigger, these lakes of fluid getting bigger, pushing on adjacent structures, and that leads to some of the symptoms, which we'll talk about. But the pressure sometimes is normal. And the short story is neurologists aren't quite sure why the pressure is normal in these patients. So in other words, they have these same symptoms of hydrocephalus, but the pressure is normal for whatever reason. So that's why it's called normal pressure hydrocephalus.
What does this look like in adults? Like, how would Billy Joel, what would he have gone to his doctor or to a hospital complaining of?
So we have our nerve fibers that start at the top of our brain, go all the way down and go all the way down to our spinal cord. But they kind of take a loop around these ventricles, these lakes of fluid. So they kind of like, imagine them at the lake. Some of them appear right at the border of where these lakes of fluids touch the brain, okay? So that would be an area. If the lakes of fluid get bigger, then they could impinge on those areas. And what do those areas control? Well, motor fibers that innervate your legs and your bladder are the two areas that can be affected early on. So
it's that specific.
Yeah, you get incontinence. So have to go to the bathroom more frequently, or urgency. Do you know the symptom urgency, Ali, where like you have to go to the bathroom and you have to go right now, and if you don't, you're gonna have an accident, you know?
I've been at a bar a few nights in my life where I was like, oh God, if I don't get there quick, it's going to be trouble. But in general, I don't think I have that.
No, yeah.
I didn't know there was a term for it. That it happens so often with people that there's a term.
Yeah, of course, yeah. Or just incontinence, right? That could be it. So now you're seeing, one of my friends who shall remain nameless was like, okay, I can't believe he's canceled his concerts. He should be able to do it with just, even if he has this normal pressure.
A diaper on?
I'm like, yeah, I mean, he is a human being who, may not want to have to deal with these accidents. But then the other problem is your gait or your walking. And it's the earliest feature, the one that responds the best to treatment. So you have what's called a slow gait. We call that bradykinetic. Broad base, so a very wide stance between your 2 feet. A shuffling gait, similar to what you see in Parkinson's. But they also have what's called a magnetic gait, where it's like you have magnets on the bottom of your feet and the ground is metallic. So you have to
there's all those things happening at the same time, or you could have one of those types
you could have some of them. Some of them, usually have a couple of those.
Okay.
And then the other thing is you can also get dementia as well, just because it's pressing on other areas in the brain. So you can get some dementia as well. Again, so we don't know what kind of dementia you might be having. And so you can get forgetfulness, decreased attention, and decreased inertia, and just slowness of thinking, which is called bradyphrenia. But, just slow to do everything, basically. So not just your motor movements, but just anything. Just your overall thinking gets slow. So again, that's challenging to try and do a concert tour with this.
I don't think you've mentioned this yet, but what causes this? You said it can, with younger kids, sometimes you might know they had meningitis, or sometimes, I guess it's congenital for some kids as well. Why would it be happening in somebody?
Yeah, so it's a good point. So 50% of patients, you don't know what causes it. It just happens for unknown reasons. The other 50%, it's due to something like what you said. So head injury, bleeding in the brain, like a ruptured aneurysm could secondarily cause this, a meningitis, or brain tumor. Sometimes brain tumors end up clogging up this ventricular system and the spinal fluid pathways. So that's 50% is those known causes, but 50% unknown cause.
Do we know what the cause is for Billy?
No, they haven't said that yet.
Okay.
So, yeah, good question.
How common is it? I imagine not that common because it's not in the common parlance.
Yeah, it's not that uncommon, surprisingly enough. So it occurs if you just take a sample of 100,000 people, about 20 to 22 will have it. But in terms of new cases a year, there's probably 5 per 100,000 new cases per year. So I would say an incidence like that is not that uncommon. And if you work in a hospital as a neurologist, you're probably going to see a couple cases a year.
Okay.
Adult neurologist, by the way. This normal pressure hydrocephalus does not occur in kids. It's not a thing. they get the other kind of hydrocephalus with the high pressure, but this is specifically in older people for whatever reason. It probably has to do with, like, again, why the pressure is normal, probably has to do with the elasticity of the brain as you get older. That's what we think, but we don't know exactly.
And how do they diagnose it? I guess there's brain scans that have to...
Yeah, a CT or an MRI is actually better. And then what you look at is, again, these ventricles, these lakes of fluid, are they bigger than what we'd expect? And people's brains, Ali, sorry to tell you, they do atrophy as you get older, just as the process of normal aging. So you kind of have to judge, right? Like, is it that the ventricles are bigger?
Yeah.
But sometimes just the brain is shrunken a little bit. So what is what, right? But that's why you have to have it interpreted by a radiologist who has expertise in this. And then sometimes you can see those edges, like I was talking about, the brain tissue that's at the edge of the ventricles. You can see kind of swelling or change in the signal intensity right beside the ventricle, which means that there's swelling and kind of pushing into that area. So those are clues would tell you. There's a few other ones which I won't get into because they're mainly just for neurologists and neuroradiologists, but those are kind of the main things that I can tell you.
And then let's talk about treatment. How does this get solved? Is there a cure? I'm getting a feeling there isn't.
Yes and no. So it's a good point. So one of the other tests people do, which is kind of a treatment as well, is doing a lumbar puncture or spinal tap, right? So what they suggest, which isn't necessarily always done, but they suggest people should undergo a spinal puncture, a lumbar puncture, a spinal tap, and you could measure the pressure to see what it looks like, but also just removing fluid from the process of doing a spinal tap. Because again, you can go in at the spine because all the fluid's connected, right? The fluid in your brain is connected to the fluid in your spine. Sometimes just draining it, the fluid, can help with the symptoms. And in fact, some people say you actually have to do testing before and after you drain the fluid. So you do what's called a neuropsychological evaluation, where you look at memory and other kind of testing like that. And you even time people's walking. And then you remove like 50 cc's of spinal fluid, and then you repeat those tests an hour later, the walking and the neuropsychological evaluation. And if you see an improvement, then that's a positive finding. And then you might say that those patients would be good ones to have a shunt. So just like the similar shunt I was talking to you about before that we put in little kids who have the hydrocephalus, you can put a shunt in their brain that will drain the fluid. And some people say actually checking their bladder function too before and after is not a bad idea. Now they've kind of, some people don't do the spinal tap test, but they actually put in a drain that goes in their brain that just drains into kind of like a bag at the side of the bed. So then you come into the hospital and do that. And then you could do a more accurate prognosis about whether like the spinal shunt would help with these patients.
You ever say the word shunt to somebody and they say, "Are you making up words right now?"
Oh, it doesn't sound like a real word?
Doesn't sound like a real word.
Okay,
We'd never heard it and thought it came out of you just like looking for a word and you're like, this one will work for now. It's a real thing. And then you said yes and no with respect to cures. The shunt surgery is a yes, it works?
Yeah, so it's a bit tough. Again, a lot of people say your response to this trial of either doing a spinal tap or this external drain, that predicts on how well you respond. So one study looked at about 150 patients who had this external drain put in. They saw that they improved, and then they went and gave them a shunt, and 90% improved. So that sounds really good. And that's been shown that testing it out with an external drain, seeing who improves, that helps you decide who gets surgery. But another study, they looked at people who had shunt surgery even when they had a negative external drain testing. So in other words, the external drain, it was tried, they didn't really improve in their symptoms, and they still went ahead and had surgery. And some of those people improved too, about 64% in this one study. So it depends. So in other words, usually you test things out first to see if they improve, and if they do, you definitely go for surgery. But even if they don't improve, you might still want to consider surgery for those people. So there's a good chance you could have some improvement, but certainly not everybody does. And so that's the other thing. I'm not sure where Billy Joel is in all this. Has he had the surgery? He probably has, because again, like they've postponed his concerts a couple times. So I thought probably he's already had the surgery and maybe he didn't have a good response to it, but I'm not sure. Okay, Okay, that's our episode for today. Let us know what you guys thought about Billy Joel. Is he your favorite? Is he your least favorite? What about the songs we chose? What did you guys think? Let us know. drvcomedian@gmail.com, drvcomedian, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky. We're everywhere. Ali, what do you got going on towards the summer?
Relaxing as of right now, the way I want it, the way I like it, the way I never have it. Just a bit of an easygoing summer, but any shows that I do will be on standupali.com. Probably shows around Toronto a fair amount, but not too much out of town in later June and most of July.
That sounds good.
It does.
But remember, even though we talked about normal pressure hydrocephalus, I'm not Billy Joel's doctor and I'm not your doctor. Medical issues we talk about are for your interest and information only, and they're not medical advice. Please consult your medical professionals for actual medical advice. Thanks for listening.
Bye.